Closing arguments beginning today in the trial of Derek Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer who is facing murder charges, second and third degree murder potentially, and manslaughter potentially in the death of George Floyd. The closing arguments this morning, and then the jury is expected to start deliberations this afternoon, and there's a great deal of tension in terms of what could come from the verdict, because the video that showed Derek Chauvin kneeling on the neck of George Floyd for more than 9 minutes sparked nationwide protests in the U.S. and internationally, and a reckoning over race and police accountability. We have a CBC News team in Minneapolis. Magda Gabriselassie is part of that, and she is right outside the county courthouse for us this morning. Magda, take us through what is going to happen today and the main issue, issues, stages of the trial that we should expect today.
Well, we're expecting to hear a lot of the main points that we heard throughout the trial, including whether or not Derek Chauvin was violating police procedures when he dug his knee into George Floyd that day, whether that led to George Floyd's death in the end, and the greater impact of all of this on Floyd's family, the members of the community, the witnesses that were there that day. And of course, this all sparked international protests, as you said. Now, throughout the trial, we heard from more than 40 witnesses, most of them for the prosecution, including a long list of police officers, including the police chief, who condemned Chauvin's actions that day. We also heard from medical experts who said that it was because George Floyd was deprived of oxygen that he died. But of course, on the defense side, we heard from the defense that they tried to show that Chauvin was acting appropriately that day. They had their own use of force expert that testified. Also, they're trying to show that George Floyd died as a result of other contributing factors, drug use, health conditions as well. Now, one thing we did not hear during the trial is we did not hear from Derek Chauvin himself. He chose not to testify. And that was actually something that surprised Andrew Wilson, and he is a criminal defense lawyer here in Minneapolis. He's not involved with this case, but he was surprised by that. Here's more from him.
I was shocked that he chose not to testify in his own defense. Number one, testifying in his own defense would have humanized him, or would have been an attempt to humanize him to the jury. As is, the jury has not heard from him. They haven't heard his version of events. They haven't heard his perspective. They haven't heard his outlook, any remorse, anything like that. So in terms of the biggest boon to the defense, it would have been humanizing Mr. Chauvin.
Now, for him, it says this kind of indicates that maybe the defense had some concerns about a cross-examination that would follow after Chauvin testified, and maybe that's why he did not testify. Now, all of this, of course, we're expecting to be brought up in the closing arguments for both sides, and that, of course, will start today.
So, Magda, the city and indeed the country getting ready to hear this verdict in the very near future, and given what we know and the tension surrounding this case, I would imagine everybody's holding their breath as they await this verdict. What is your sense as you're there now on the scene of how people are preparing for this?
Well, yeah, it is a very tense time. We've driven around, and what you see is members of the National Guard on different corners. You also see businesses that are boarded up. Some of them have spray painted messages that say justice for George Floyd. But this is also a tense time because there was a police shooting in which a black man was killed in that shooting. Dante Wright was shot and killed just over a week ago by a police officer that police say believed she was using her taser. She has since been charged with manslaughter, but there are calls for those charges to be upgraded to murder. And every night there have been protests. Sometimes it has turned violent. There have been arrests. A curfew was put in place over the weekend. So it is a very tense time. And then, of course, everybody is waiting to see how this verdict will come down.
Magda, thank you very much. Looking forward to the reporting from you and our CBC News team there in Minneapolis. That is Magda Gabriselassie.